Hello friends, for today's video we are going to be doing a non-spoiler review for The Children of Gods and Fighting Men. This is not only one of my favorite things that I've picked up this year, but I think it might be my new favorite historical fantasy book. So a lot of this video is going to be basically me hyping this up and gushing over why I thought it was fantastic and why a lot of you might enjoy it as well. But I will take a moment to kind of highlight things that maybe won't make this for you, to ensure that, of course, as always, that I am as much as possible relaying to you something in a way where you can kind of decide for yourself if it's something you want to check out. But selfishly, I want as many people to check this out as possible because I thought it was great. I think it's incredibly underhyped and it deserves so much more love. Jumping into it, I'm going to start with a very simplistic idea of what you're going to get with this and then go into more details, because I know that for some people they don't want too much, so I do want to provide a little brief overview. However, I also just want to make clear that this brief overview is not going to 100% accurately depict what you're going to get with it, but I do feel like it's kind of a fun little way to think of it. So imagine if Game of Thrones only followed Daenerys and Cersei, and it was Irish. And I do feel like that's kind of a very, very basic way to portray a little bit of what you're gonna get with this. But I don't feel like that does enough, so I do want to get into more specifics. The two main perspectives of this story are a woman named Gormla and a woman named Fola. Gormla is a character who has been a part of this group of people that have the ability to use fire magic. However, they have been hunted by Fola's people for centuries, and as a result, they've kind of gone into hiding, and they actually have been very successfully hunted down. So even though she has fire magic, she for the most part has to keep it hidden. She doesn't have the ability to really use it and use it freely, because it would draw attention to herself and it would put a target on her back. And fortunately, through her mother's scheming, her mother managed to keep hidden Gormla and her brother's identities. So it seems as though to the opposing race of mythical people, it seems to them that they have succeeded in hunting them all. So it's especially important that this character, Gormla, keeps not only her powers a secret, but has the ability to potentially, either her or her brother, through their long lives, be able to have children that can kind of come back and have these powers again. And I do feel like this creates for a very understandable reason why our character isn't utilizing her magical powers. I think something that can be really frustrating for a lot of fantasy readers is when somebody has powers and then they don't use them. It almost feels like it's a plot convenience type of thing just to create tension, or because maybe we know that we didn't do enough when it came to trying to have like checks and balances on the magic, and so we just kind of come up with a reason for them not to use it. Hers is a very legitimate reason. If it's discovered she has this magic, she will definitely be killed. So she is somebody who is determined to not only be protecting herself, but there is only one other person that she cares about at all, and that is her son. And this is where the kind of like Cersei comparison comes into the picture, because she is a horrible person. She is awful. I do think she is a product of her environment. She had a horrible, horrible life. She was given to an elderly king when she was 13 years old to be his bride. She had her son very young. Now that she is essentially on her own, all she cares about is her son. What you often see happen in stories is that characters go through traumatic events and then suddenly their eyes are opened and they're like, oh, I need to be more grateful and I need to be more empathetic. But when the environments are truly terrible, oftentimes the takeaways that characters have, and I feel like the more bleak and realistic ways that these characters have these takeaways, is that they become desensitized to everybody else. They're even more emboldened to try and do whatever they can to acquire wealth, to acquire power and prestige, and basically protect themselves from ever experiencing extreme trauma ever again. And if there's anybody in their lives that they care about, they will apply that same level of aggression to protecting their loved ones, and that's it. It's kind of like us against the world. And I think Gormla realistically has that in herself because of what she experienced from a young age. This is something that is relayed to you very, very quickly, very efficiently. It doesn't feel like an info dump by any means. You just feel like right away you understand this character, but you also are kind of, as a reader, worried like, I don't think she's going to be a good person. And nobody's really good in the traditional sense. Everybody, it's very morally flawed, which I think is what you want out of a historical fiction setting. You want to feel as though you understand why characters are the way they are, and why it's not necessarily these easy moral choices, why these characters are often falling into the camp of being at the very least morally gray, if not villainous. But this character is masterfully crafted to be a horrible, horrible person, and in a way I found compelling, because sometimes you read about these characters and they can feel cartoonishly evil, whereas with her, you understand her motivations, you understand why she responds to things the way she does, and I don't know that I can say I rooted for her, but I was consistently engaged with her plot lines and what she was doing. That was the sort of Cersei character perspective. The other main perspective you get, Fola, is somebody who, like I said, if you're going to take a character from Game of Thrones, it'd be kind of like the Daenerys character, where she's kind of off doing her own thing. You know that their paths are going to cross. You know that there are going to be things that bring them together. But Fola is somebody who you discover that through living long lives, and sometimes having the means to pass down their abilities, because Fola doesn't have the same abilities as Gormla does, but she also has the ability to live a very long life. If you have a child who does not inherit these abilities, that means you are likely going to outlive your child. And you discover very quickly that that is what has happened to this character. So you're looking at somebody who has lost a child and who they do have a very different grasp on life and what they want from it than the Gormla character. I feel like these are great contrasting perspectives to have. But she has magical abilities that are rooted in healing. She's also from the group that has hunted down Gormla's people. So you recognize that this group, even though you have a character that morally you likely like her more than Gormla, and you kind of do find yourself rooting for her and you can relate to her and you understand why she is the way she is, you also, though, are kind of asking yourself if the group that she's a part of has been too villainous and if it's kind of created the monster that Gormla is. So she individually is a person that you find yourself rooting for, but the association she has with this other group you kind of are worried about and you question and you wonder, maybe you shouldn't be a part of this. And where I think that the plot becomes much more intriguing is through the group that she's a part of, because they kind of play from the background and in the shadows a hand in the events that are happening with humans, even though they've tried to convince themselves, oh no, we stay away from the affairs of humans because we play too big of a role and humans can't be trusted, they're too terrible. But also go spy on that king for us and let's see what they're up to, because we don't really want them to do what they're planning on doing. So you see the way that they have convinced themselves that they're not going to play a role, but they absolutely do, which create this kind of subterfuge plotline. And she is an integral part of that because they have asked her to essentially spy on some very high-ranking individuals and then report back. And they figure you have healing abilities, don't openly broadcast your magic with your healing abilities, but you have a lot of knowledge as well in the healing craft. So go ahead and use that to get in the good graces of these powerful people and then report back to us. And the whole time you're reading it, you just know that somehow Gormla and Fola's perspectives are going to clash at some point, and that these two women, both formidable in their own ways, one of whom is very outwardly aggressive and the other one who's very quietly resilient, you know that they're going to clash in some fashion. But even though that is obvious to you as you're reading, the how you get there is the part that I think is really, really fun and fascinating to follow, and also made for an incredibly fast-paced book, despite the fact that not necessarily a ton of action is happening. What I think is really fun is that Gormla is a character that has a lot of agency. Because it's a historical fiction setting and given its location and its time period, neither one of these women hold a lot of power necessarily in an obvious sense, both because of their positions with where they are, but also because of the fact that they are women and they are not valued necessarily. Gormla has certainly more power in her position as the mother of a high-ranking individual than Fola does, as somebody who's kind of just trying to pretend to sit in the background. However, Gormla still doesn't have all the power, so she really has to rely on her, you could say, womanly wiles, and also her ability to scheme, of which she is doing constantly. And it is kind of entertaining to watch her consistently think that she's smarter than everybody in the room, and sometimes she does outsmart everybody, and then somebody will take her aback on occasion, sometimes because they're intelligent or sometimes because they're genuinely nice. It's kind of sad when common decency is something that takes her aback, and it really showcases the way that she has never really experienced kindness before, and it's a very cutthroat world, and everybody is always vying for power. Everybody's always trying to trample everybody else to get where they want to go. So that's very much her environment, but you are watching her consistently try to analyze this. She's a product of her environment. She's a monster of her own making in some ways, because she doesn't try to be better than it. She just tries to utilize it. So she is consistently trying to outsmart, outwit, and trick everybody around her so that her son can have a higher position. From there, you have Fola, who is just kind of like, I have this little boy that I'm taking care of, who I won't reveal why she has this little boy she's taking care of, but she has this child that means a lot to her, and she's trying to care for him. And she honestly just wants to kind of like live in a shack in the woods with this little boy and take care of him. That's all she really wants in the story, but instead she's kind of forced to be swept up in the events going on around her. So it's very interesting that one of them is kind of like actively having a lot of agency, or at least the most that she can have given her circumstances, and the other one's like, I don't really want to be here, but I guess I have to be. She's so compassionate, and she is quietly feisty, because there are a lot of characters that exist that they say stuff sometimes and you're like, not the moment for this. You just like, you gotta keep your cool and wait till later, or not at all, because like, read the room. You have characters sometimes that are just so dumb, and she has moments where she, for the most part, just knows her place. She just kind of keeps to what she's doing. She listens, she tries to get information, she tries to help people because she genuinely cares about the craft of healing. However, she also sometimes cannot resist, because she is kind of slightly idealistic, but when something really to her core makes her kind of sick to her stomach to see the way people are mistreated, she will say something that at the end of the day doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but to challenge authority and challenge power is just something that people in her position don't do. So it actually is incredibly brave when she does. And what's great is that some of the people that she's interacting with, they genuinely want the world to be better. And so rather than getting angry at her for every now and then, it's not like she's reckless, but every now and then she'll say something that's somewhat like speaking her mind. The way that other characters respond to that is really, it's quite fascinating to watch. It's fun to watch the ways in which the interactions that these characters have with those around them, the different ways that they play out. And I do feel like she's not necessarily a character that's just ultimately absolutely perfect, because she makes mistakes and she's flawed, but just the difference in when you have a character that seems like they genuinely are just trying to put good out into the world, which is such a rare thing for this environment, the way that it kind of does draw people's attention in all of the right ways, but it can draw attention in the wrong ways too. And you kind of do have this sort of surface level bad guy, good guy, when are they going to go head to head feeling. But you also recognize that there's complexity all around. A lot of that complexity comes alongside the side characters that show up in the story. And I do want to compliment, there are a lot of side characters that show up. And I already outlined that Gormla is consistently looking at everything around her and assessing. Whereas with Fola, it's kind of like, these are the people I'm around. And they have distinct aspects to them, but she's not necessarily analyzing them in the exact same way. However, there are all these different characters, and you think it would be very easy to get lost in all of that and to not be able to keep track, especially given that, and I really appreciate the authenticity that the author has within the names and such things for these characters, but sometimes there's a lot of names and they're not necessarily names that I'm the most familiar with. However, I never was having to second guess who was being discussed. I thought that the way that the author very, very efficiently captured characters, their personalities, their motivations, and just getting like the briefest of things about them, and I knew exactly who was who. And I also was wondering, who do I need to keep my eye on? Who do I need to watch out for? I actually really like this guy. This guy seems nice. I'm not sure about this lady. There's just somehow, despite the fact there's not a ton of pages in this book, I mean, it's a decent sized book, but it's not necessarily huge, but very, very efficiently, we were able to establish so much about the side characters. And it just felt like it came to life really brilliantly. And I was on the edge of my seat consistently. As I said before, there's not a ton of action necessarily. There are the occasional battles and other such things. And sometimes there's like backstabbing and things that you don't expect. But I wouldn't say this is a page turner in the traditional sense of just every single thing is leading to something with huge stakes in a way that's rooted in some kind of fight or something where it's very physical or tangible. It's just sometimes the intrigue of it all that you're like, well, but that guy said this though, and isn't that going to mean that over here that's going to affect this? And then I just kind of found myself flying through it. And also, I do want to say, if you are a fan of audiobooks, I really, really quite enjoyed the narrator for this one. But regardless, I just never wanted to stop reading. I thought it was so good. I flew through it. And also, I felt so lost in it at the same time. I just feel like it's transportive. It utilizes the historical fantasy setting incredibly well. I really felt for these characters. I liked them. I hated the one, but like I liked to hate her, and I understood why she was the way she was. I found them fascinating to follow, and I just really liked their interactions with each other and the way things played out. I really enjoyed it. I also think that the book does a great job of not trying to tell you how you're supposed to feel about anything. It's just sort of like, I'm inviting you to come along with these characters and this story, and it's very harsh and bleak, but I think that's very true to what you would anticipate for that time in that setting. I loved this book. I thought it was fantastic. I cannot wait to continue. I can't wait to continue with the series, and then just in general see what else, if this author plans to write other things, because from this one book alone, I'm like, I'm sold. I thought it was great. I can't wait for more. And when it comes to historical fantasy, I do want to highlight why this book maybe won't work for some people, and I do think it's rooted in the historical fantasy things, which is that you aren't getting a ton of magic. You're not even really getting a magic system. It is very kind of lore-based, which fits the setting. However, it's not necessarily the most creative and unique of ideas and concepts, and I know for some people they are looking for the magic system. They're looking for the rules and limitations. They want to understand the hard, concrete details of the weaknesses and the things that make characters stronger. And you don't really get that. It's like these people have some abilities with fire and they live a long time, and sometimes their children do and sometimes they don't. And then this other group, same thing with the living long lives and the children, but also they have more variety in their powers. Like some of them heal, some of them have illusions and are witch-like. That's that. You know, there's not really necessarily the most concrete of details. But for me, I didn't need that. But some people, they want these worlds that are entirely different from our own. They're not really interested in the historical side of things. They also sometimes want more rootable characters. Maybe you don't necessarily want to despise the characters you're reading about. I think in an intentional way and in a way that is fun to follow. But I know some people are like, no, I want to follow heroes, which I'm not trying to mock or say there's anything wrong with that. Sometimes you just need a story that gives you some hope. And I don't know if this story did this. The whole time I was reading, I'm like, if this person dies, you know, it's one of those where you're like, I think it could happen and I don't know, but also I'm afraid it's going to. So it's one of those stories. And I also think that some people are just not necessarily as enamored with intrigue as I am. Some people need a little bit more to happen. And if that's you, then, you know, this might not be the book for you. Also, I will say both perspectives are first person, and not everybody loves first person point of view. I really liked the way the author utilized first person. I wouldn't go as far as to say they're unreliable narrators necessarily, but I do feel like the idea that they're only understanding the world around them through their own experiences, I think that was done really well. And ironically, I think first person perspective, even though you're so connected to the characters, thus you would expect to know them better, I actually think first person can fall into the trap of you're just being told everything by this empty vessel. And I don't think that was true at all. These characters have a lot of personality and a lot to them and a lot of depth. So I think actually it was a masterful use of first person. That said, for some people, they just so prefer third person, and maybe it just makes it easier, especially in the case of stories like this where there's a lot of moving pieces. They feel like third person does a better job accomplishing being able to understand various different motivations. And I think for the level of complexity with everything going on, some people will prefer if there's not just two perspectives, and they'll actually want a bigger cast. So there's a lot of reasons why maybe this isn't fitting to your taste. But if you like historical fantasy, or if you're not opposed to trying a historical fantasy, this one's so good. It's so good. I want more people to pick it up, and I want more people to read it because I thought it was fantastic. Anyway, that is it for this non-spoiler review of The Children of Gods and Fighting Men. I thought it was amazing. I can't wait to continue. If you've read it, feel free to let me know your thoughts. If you want to mention any spoilers, as always, just ensure that you put a spoiler warning and then hit enter a bunch of times. If you are interested in checking this book out for yourself, I'll have it linked in the description bar for ease of access. But thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later.